On the morning of May 24, 1941, Britain's most celebrated warship, a battlecruiser that had served as the pride of the Royal Navy for 2 decades, was struck by a single shell from a German battleship and exploded, breaking in half and sinking within minutes. Of the 1,418 men aboard, only 3 survived. The ship responsible for this devastating loss was the Bismarck, Germany's newest and most powerful battleship, a vessel so formidable that its mere presence in the open Atlantic represented an existential threat to the convoy shipping lifelines keeping Britain fed and supplied during the darkest years of the Second World War. In the days that followed the loss of HMS Hood, Winston Churchill issued a single, simple order to the entire Royal Navy: sink the Bismarck. What followed was one of the largest, most intensive naval manhunts in military history, involving dozens of British warships, aircraft carriers, and submarines, all converging on a single vessel across thousands of miles of open ocean. A chase that would determine whether Germany's most powerful battleship could be stopped before it reached the safety of occupied France, and whether the Royal Navy could avenge one of the most devastating single losses in its entire history.
This is the true story of the hunt for the Bismarck.
By 1941, the Bismarck represented the culmination of German naval ambition, a battleship of extraordinary size and firepower that German naval planners intended to use as a commerce raider, deploying it into the open Atlantic specifically to attack and disrupt the convoy shipping routes, upon which Britain's wartime survival depended. The Bismarck's construction reflected years of careful German naval planning and engineering investment, producing a vessel that, at the time of its completion, ranked among the largest and most powerfully armed battleships in the world, equipped with a main armament of 8 massive 15-inch guns housed in 4 twin turrets, alongside extensive secondary armament and armor protection. Specifically designed to allow the vessel to engage and defeat virtually any individual opposing warship it might realistically encounter during Atlantic operations. German naval doctrine of this period envisioned vessels like the Bismarck operating as independent commerce raiders, using their combination of speed and overwhelming firepower to evade or defeat the various escort vessels protecting Allied convoys, inflicting maximum disruption on Britain's essential transatlantic shipping while avoiding decisive engagement with the Royal Navy's main battle fleet whenever possible. The ship's construction had been closely monitored by British naval intelligence throughout the preceding years, and by the spring of 1941, when the Bismarck finally departed German-controlled waters alongside the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen to begin its intended Atlantic raiding operation, British Naval Command recognized the genuine, severe threat this deployment represented to convoy shipping across the entire North Atlantic. British naval intelligence first detected indications of the Bismarck's movement through aerial reconnaissance and intelligence reports gathered as the German task force made its way from the Baltic toward the North Atlantic, triggering an immediate, urgent British naval response, specifically intended to locate, intercept, and, if necessary, destroy the German battleship before it could reach open Atlantic waters, where its presence would pose an almost impossible challenge to effectively track and counter across the ocean's vast expanse. British naval forces succeeded in locating the Bismarck and Prince Eugen as the German task force attempted to pass through the Denmark Strait, the narrow, ice-bound passage between Greenland and Iceland that represented one of the limited routes available for German vessels attempting to break out from the North Sea into the broader Atlantic Ocean. And on the morning of May 24, 1941, British naval forces, including the battlecruiser HMS Hood and the newer battleship HMS Prince of Wales, engaged the German vessels directly in what would become known as the Battle of the Denmark Strait. HMS Hood, at the time of this engagement, held genuine symbolic and practical significance as one of the Royal Navy's most celebrated capital ships, a battlecruiser that had served as a visible symbol of British naval power for 2 decades since its original construction, widely regarded by the British public as one of the most powerful and prestigious vessels in the entire fleet, making its role in directly confronting the Bismarck a matter of considerable public and institutional significance beyond the immediate tactical considerations of the engagement itself. Naval historians have subsequently noted a significant tactical vulnerability that the Hood carried into this engagement, reflecting the vessel's original construction during the First World War era, decades before the battle actually took place, a period when naval architecture generally prioritized speed and offensive firepower over the kind of extensive deck armor protection that later battleship designs, including the Bismarck itself, incorporated. Specifically to protect against the kind of plunging, long-range shell fire that had become increasingly relevant to naval combat by the outbreak of the Second World War. This relative deficiency in deck armor protection, a known limitation that Royal Navy planners had been aware of for years prior to the engagement, would prove directly relevant to the catastrophic outcome the Hood ultimately suffered during its brief encounter with the Bismarck's guns. The resulting battle proved to be catastrophically brief and one-sided in its outcome, with the Bismarck's gunners achieving a devastating, direct hit on the Hood within minutes of the engagement's opening exchange of fire, a shell that penetrated the aging battlecruiser's comparatively thin deck armor and detonated within one of its ammunition magazines, triggering a massive secondary explosion that broke the ship in half and caused it to sink within a matter of minutes, an outcome so swift and total that many witnesses aboard nearby vessels initially struggled to process what they had just observed, watching one of the Royal Navy's most storied vessels disappear beneath the waves in less time than it takes to properly process the scale of such a catastrophic sudden loss. Of the 1,418 officers and crew aboard HMS Hood at the time of its sinking, only 3 men survived, rescued from the frigid North Atlantic waters in the aftermath of the engagement, a casualty rate so severe and a loss so sudden that it sent genuine shockwaves through the Royal Navy and the broader British public upon the news reaching London. Representing one of the single most devastating individual losses the Royal Navy would suffer throughout the entire war. News of the Hood's destruction reached Winston Churchill and the British War Cabinet within hours, and Churchill's response reflected both the genuine emotional impact of losing such a symbolically significant vessel and the clear strategic recognition that the Bismarck, having now demonstrated its devastating combat effectiveness in actual battle, represented an active, immediate threat that could not be allowed to continue operating freely within the Atlantic, resulting in Churchill's now famous directive to the Royal Navy that the Bismarck must be sunk, an order that mobilized an extraordinary concentration of British naval resources specifically toward locating and destroying the single German battleship responsible for the Hood's loss. In the days immediately following the Battle of the Denmark Strait, the Royal Navy committed an extraordinary proportion of its available Atlantic and home fleet resources to the pursuit of the Bismarck, involving numerous battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and an aircraft carrier, all converging from various positions across the North Atlantic in a coordinated effort to relocate and ultimately destroy the German battleship, which had, in the aftermath of the Denmark Strait engagement, become separated from its escorting cruiser Prinz Eugen, and was now attempting to make its way toward the relative safety of German-occupied French ports, where it could receive repairs for damage sustained during its earlier engagement with British forces, and resupply for continued Atlantic operations. The Bismarck had in fact sustained meaningful damage during its engagement with the Hood and Prince of Wales, including a hit that had ruptured a fuel tank and caused a fuel leak that would prove directly relevant to the ship's subsequent movements and ultimate fate. Damage that led the Bismarck's commanding officers to conclude that continuing the originally planned extended Atlantic raiding operation was no longer advisable given the ship's compromised fuel situation, prompting the decision to instead make directly for occupied France, where the damaged battleship could undergo necessary repairs before potentially resuming offensive operations at a later date. This decision to head toward France, rather than continuing further into the Atlantic or attempting to return to Germany via the same route it had used to enter the ocean, set the stage for the extended, genuinely dramatic pursuit that would unfold across the following days, as British naval forces worked to relocate the Bismarck after briefly losing direct contact with the vessel following the Denmark Strait engagement. A period of uncertainty, during which British commanders faced genuine anxiety regarding whether the German battleship might successfully evade the extensive search effort being mounted against it and reach the safety of French waters undetected. British forces succeeded in re-establishing contact with the Bismarck through a combination of radio direction-finding intelligence and aerial reconnaissance, allowing the pursuing British naval forces to begin closing the considerable distance that had opened between themselves and the fleeing German battleship. Though the sheer scale of the North Atlantic and the Bismarck's continued evasive maneuvering meant that successfully intercepting the vessel before it could reach the protective range of German aircraft and submarines operating from occupied France remained a genuinely uncertain proposition throughout much of the pursuit. This period of the pursuit proved genuinely tense for British Naval Command, given the very real possibility that the Bismarck might successfully evade the extensive search effort and reach the protective range of German land-based aircraft and submarine forces operating from occupied French bases, a development that would have dramatically complicated any further British attempt to intercept and destroy the battleship, potentially allowing it to reach safe harbor for repairs before eventually resuming active operations against Atlantic convoy shipping at a later date. British reconnaissance aircraft conducted extensive search patterns across the anticipated area of the Bismarck's likely course towards France, working in coordination with signals intelligence efforts attempting to track the vessel's radio communications, gradually narrowing the search area until visual contact with the fleeing battleship was finally re-established, restoring British Naval Command's ability to coordinate an effective interception before the Bismarck could close the remaining distance to safety. A pivotal moment in the pursuit came when aircraft launched from the British aircraft carrier HMS Royal succeeded in locating and attacking the Bismarck using torpedo bombers, an attack that, despite initial confusion and even a brief, fortunately unsuccessful attack against a British cruiser mistakenly identified as the target, ultimately succeeded in scoring a critical torpedo hit against the Bismarck's stern section, causing severe damage to the battleship's steering mechanism and effectively jamming its rudder in a position that left the vessel unable to maintain a controlled course. A genuinely decisive development that transformed the Bismarck from a fast, evasive target capable of potentially outrunning its pursuers into a crippled vessel now moving in slow, uncontrolled circles, unable to make any further meaningful progress toward the safety of French waters it had been so close to reaching. The aircraft responsible for this decisive attack, Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers, represented a genuinely unlikely instrument of such a consequential strategic outcome, being aging, fabric-covered biplane aircraft that, by the technological standards of 1941, already appeared considerably outdated compared to more modern monoplane aircraft designs entering service with various air forces around the world at the time. Despite this apparent technological obsolescence, the Swordfish's specific combination of slow flying speed and exceptional maneuverability proved genuinely well suited to the demanding, low-altitude torpedo attack profile the mission required, and the aircraft's crews succeeded in pressing their attack through intense German anti-aircraft fire to deliver the torpedo strike that would ultimately determine the entire pursuit's final outcome. A remarkable demonstration of how an ostensibly outdated weapons platform could still deliver decisive strategic results when employed with sufficient skill and determination under the right tactical circumstances. This crucial damage to the Bismarck's steering capability, inflicted by aircraft flying from a carrier whose own torpedo bombers were, by this stage of naval aviation development, relatively modest, aging biplane aircraft rather than more advanced contemporary designs, proved to be the single most decisive tactical development of the entire pursuit, effectively sealing the Bismarck's fate by eliminating any realistic prospect that the battleship could evade the pursuing British naval forces now converging on its crippled, uncontrollable position. With the Bismarck now effectively immobilized and unable to maneuver away from its approaching pursuers, British naval forces, including the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, closed in on the crippled German vessel on the morning of May 27, 1941, beginning a sustained, direct naval engagement that would ultimately determine the Bismarck's final fate, through overwhelming concentrated firepower brought to bear against a vessel that, despite its crippled steering, remained a formidable, heavily armored and armed opponent that could not simply be dismissed as an easy target, even in its compromised condition.
The resulting engagement proved to be a sustained, intensive naval battle, with British battleships firing repeated salvos against the Bismarck over an extended period, gradually inflicting severe, cumulative damage to the German vessel's superstructure, weapon systems, and internal compartments, while the Bismarck itself, though increasingly unable to effectively return fire as the battle progressed and its own system suffered escalating damage, continued resisting for a considerably longer period than British commanders had initially anticipated.
A testament to the vessel's genuinely substantial armor protection and structural resilience, even under the concentrated fire of multiple British capital ships. The final battle unfolded over approximately 2 hours of sustained combat, during which British battleships close to increasingly short range in order to maximize the effectiveness of their gunfire against the crippled but still formidably armored German vessel, gradually reducing the Bismarck superstructure to a burning, devastated wreck, while its main gun turrets were progressively silenced one by one, as British shells found their marks against the ship's weapon systems and fire control equipment. Despite this overwhelming, sustained bombardment, the Bismarck's hull itself proved remarkably resistant to sinking through gunfire alone, a durability that reflected the sophisticated compartmentalized damage control design German naval engineers had incorporated into the vessel's construction, ultimately requiring the additional torpedo strikes that would finally send the battleship to the ocean floor. Ultimately, following this extended engagement that left the Bismarck severely damaged, burning, and largely unable to continue effective resistance, the British cruiser HMS Dorsetshire delivered the final torpedo strikes that contributed to the battleship's eventual sinking. Though the precise combination of factors that ultimately sent the Bismarck beneath the waves, including ongoing historical debate regarding whether the vessel was ultimately sunk primarily through this combined British naval action, or whether German crew members aboard the doomed vessel had themselves initiated scuttling procedures to prevent the ship's capture, has remained a subject of some continued historical discussion among naval historians studying the battle's final phase in detail. The Bismarck ultimately sank beneath the North Atlantic on the morning of May 27, 1941, with the overwhelming majority of its crew, numbering over 2,000 men, going down with the vessel or perishing in the frigid surrounding waters in the aftermath of the sinking, with only a relatively small number of survivors, several hundred men, ultimately rescued by British vessels. Before deteriorating weather conditions and the continued operational risk of remaining in the area, given ongoing concern regarding potential German submarine activity, forced British rescue vessels to abandon further rescue efforts, leaving a considerable number of German sailors who had survived the initial sinking to perish in the water before any further rescue could be attempted. The sinking of the Bismarck represented a genuinely significant strategic and psychological victory for Britain, both directly avenging the earlier devastating loss of HMS Hood and eliminating what had represented one of the most serious individual threats to British Atlantic convoy shipping throughout the entire war, removing Germany's most powerful surface raiding vessel from active operational service, and delivering a clear demonstration of the Royal Navy's continued capacity to locate and destroy even Germany's most formidable individual warships when sufficiently motivated and resourced to do so. Beyond its immediate strategic significance, the sinking of the Bismarck also carried substantial broader strategic implications for German naval policy throughout the remainder of the war, contributing to a marked German shift away from continued reliance on large surface raiding vessels operating independently in the open Atlantic, given the demonstrated vulnerability such vessels faced once successfully located by concentrated British naval forces. A strategic lesson that influenced German naval planning for the remainder of the conflict and contributed to Germany's subsequent increasing reliance on submarine warfare as its primary means of continuing to threaten Allied Atlantic shipping in the years that followed. The wreck of the Bismarck was eventually located on the ocean floor in 1989, nearly 5 decades after its sinking, discovered by an expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard, whose team had previously achieved considerable fame for locating the wreck of the RMS Titanic several years earlier, a discovery that allowed historians and naval experts to conduct detailed physical examination of the sunken battleship's remains, contributing valuable additional evidence to the ongoing historical analysis and debate regarding the precise sequence of damage and events that had ultimately led to the vessel sinking during its final engagement in May 1941. Ballard's expedition and subsequent examinations of the wreck site found the Bismarck resting upright on the ocean floor at a depth of nearly 15,000 feet, having apparently slid down an underwater slope after initially settling on the seabed, with the resulting physical evidence generally supporting the interpretation that the ship's hull, despite the severe damage inflicted during the final battle, had remained largely intact rather than being broken apart by the British bombardment. Evidence that many naval historians have cited as lending additional credibility to the theory that German scuttling actions played a significant, if not necessarily exclusive, role in the vessel's ultimate sinking, alongside the cumulative damage inflicted by British gunfire and torpedo strikes throughout the extended final engagement. In the decades since the war's end, the hunt for the Bismarck has remained one of the most extensively studied and popularly remembered naval engagements of the entire Second World War, a dramatic, multi-day pursuit involving dozens of vessels across thousands of miles of open ocean that ultimately came down to a single decisive torpedo strike against the battleship's steering mechanism. A moment of genuine historical contingency that transformed what might otherwise have been a successful German escape into one of the Royal Navy's most celebrated victories of the entire war. A story that continues to be studied and retold as one of the definitive naval engagements of the 20th century's most devastating global conflict. This has been Forgotten Frontlines. Every story we bring you is researched, written, and brought to life by the V-Team, because some battles deserve to be remembered, no matter how strange, no matter how forgotten. If this story moved you, like this video, share it with someone who loves history, and subscribe for more forgotten stories from the front lines of the past. We'll see you in the next one.